Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Tally. This is episode 42, and I'm your host, Brian Tally. The mission and the goal of this podcast is to bring an engaging conversation that will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of some of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and on Spotify. The online information and handles are all located on the scrolling ticker at the bottom portion of your screen. Be sure to like and share the program as well. You can also support the program by going to Anchor FM or Spotify and clicking the support button. Folks, let me tell you about Patriot Home Services, a reliable company who stands by their work and comes in on time and on budget. Patriot Home Services is located in the Woodlands, Texas, and offers a wide array of services. Cody Dawson, the owner, is a hands-on contractor who will follow through on your project and will leave you having perhaps the best contracting experience you've ever had. Whether you need home additions, remodels, outdoor patios and kitchens, flooring, painting, and much more. One call does it all. Patriot Home Services, 720-745-2568, or visit them online at patriothomeservicesllc.com. That's Patriot Home Services LLC.com. Folks, we have a very special guest joining us on today's program. It's not every day that you get to sit down and speak with a South African native, a pilot and a pioneer as a woman in aviation. But this is just one part of one of the most extraordinary stories I think I've ever seen or heard. Natasha Rheeders was born in South Africa in 1970. Later, she went on to attend an elite Afrikaans girls' school. In 1994, Natasha started pursuing aviation as a career path and attended Johannesburg School of Flying and Flight Training College, where she qualified with multi-engine aircraft training in 5 different aircraft on her license. Natasha operated a flight school and charter business into Africa for a few years, where she got most of her experience. Natasha's training to the world of flight operations was a key move in her professional career as it opened up great opportunities. She became one of the top charter flight operators in South Africa and managed some of the largest fleets of jet aircraft in the country. The largest operator she worked with was ExecuJet South Africa, who has operations all across the world. Her love for aviation was crowned with being one of the first female aviation reporters in South Africa. She wrote technical and non-technical articles for the largest aviation magazine called World Air News. Her 4 years of journalistic contribution to this magazine took her to amazing destinations and helped her meet some of the best individuals in the industry. Natasha's Ph.D. in Aviation Business Management and Operations was awarded in 2017. This accolade was the result of her contribution to the aviation industry over a span of 20 plus years. In 2012, Natasha published a book titled If Cockpits Could Talk. The book takes a hard and very critical look at the South African general aviation industry and the lack of authority management in this transport sector. The South African aviation industry has a controversial history with pilot licensing scams in the airlines, to corruption in the Civil Aviation Authority, and much more. Her personal experience as an aviation consultant makes for interesting reading, telling the story of how she became a victim of violent crime and almost had her son kidnapped as a result of aviation corruption. The corruption was so immense and the threats so real that her family opted to leave the country for a place of safety. South Africa was not an option for her or her family to return to, so they made their way to the United States of America. The U.S. was exciting yet daunting. Her oldest son would end up serving in the United States Marine Corps, as it made their family-based visa sponsorship possible. Natasha is now a successful entrepreneur based here in Houston, Texas, specializing in landscape construction. With that, we are honored to be joined by Natasha Rheeders. How are you, ma'am?
I'm very well. Thank you, Telly. And it's wonderful to be with you today.
The pleasure is all mine. We realized that we were actually neighbors here, not directly next door, but in the same community here, in
Indeed.
Houston, where we live. I think you saw one of the other podcasts. You reached out and you introduced yourself and said, "Hey, I've got a story. Can I be on your show?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." After reading your bio and your resume and everything that you have been through, um, I wouldn't be a very smart man to not have you on this show because, again, your story is deserving to be told. And I hope and pray that I can tell your story in the way it deserves to be told. Because what folks are about to hear about your life, it is extraordinary. Again, it is going to be a very, very good show here, folks. So we've got lots to talk about here in a very short period of time of 1 hour to get it all in. And again, I want to get as much in as possible. So let's start with, what was life like as a kid growing up in South Africa?
We grew up in very strict families. When we moved to the United States, we realized how different our upbringing was from the United States. And if I can be more specific about that, is our kids are very well mannered, and we still get good and solid hidings growing up. So a spanking was part of your upbringing. And, at the time as a child, you don't understand it. And now that I'm a little bit older and I look back at the way I was brought up, I probably couldn't thank my parents enough. We were brought up extremely, extremely strict. Big Christian families, big families. Our schools are pretty much the same as yours here, and we're a little bit not as advanced as you are in the schools, laptops and the electronic stuff that your schools have. Unfortunately, that's not the luxury in most of the schools in South Africa. In fact, most of our schools go without any form of electronics. So textbooks is still a very real thing in South Africa. So growing up on the education side, although we have our challenges, I think it has great advantages because it does teach our kids still to read. It does teach our kids still to use other forms of intellectual available books and stuff to really dig into. So our internet services there is not great. So even if we did have the laptops and all the electronics, internet is not the way it is here, and it's an extremely expensive commodity to have there. Other than that, growing up, we pretty much have the same family values as what you have in the United States. We love our family time. We love outdoors with the kids. We're an extremely outdoors family. So we love our water sports. We love hiking. We love mountaining. So all of that is pretty much the same as here. We grow up very, very similar, but I do think that we grow up a lot more stricter, with a lot more discipline at home. And it's just the nature of how we grew up. And we really saw that difference when we moved here. Yeah, unless there's anything specific, it is pretty much the same.
I'm just trying to paint this picture because, most of the folks that are going to be engaging in this podcast and watching this fascinating story have never been to South Africa before. Can you paint a picture of like what a day-to-day, what life looked like as an adult there, as an aviator, from waking up to going to bed? I mean, do you have the same type of restaurants? Was it very city based? Is it more country? Can you describe kind of like what it was like?
There's a lot of misconception when people talk about South Africa, and people easily refer to Africa. Africa is a continent. There's a lot of countries on the African continent. So when you speak about South Africa, it's a very, very small country at the southern tip of the African continent. We have beautiful coastlines. We have beautiful cities. A lot of the people will be familiar with Cape Town, Johannesburg. So we have the same sort of diverse areas as you have here. Our farming is very big, and we have a lot of farmers, a lot of maize farming, a lot of banana farming. So a typical day today for us would be, as an adult, is get up in the morning. We don't have shift works like you do here. That is something that was very new for us to adapt to. So the 24-hour everything lights on being around, that doesn't happen in South Africa. And partly because there is some dangers in the country. So most people are home by 7 in the evening. You get your odd shift workers that do work in factories or so, but normal day-to-day collar workers have a 9-to-5 job. So you would typically get up in the morning, go to work, sit in hideous traffic like we would do on the I-45 here, go about your day and leave your work at 5 in the afternoon, go back, family. For a child, it's a very different experience from here, and I can't emphasize enough how the children here don't realize how privileged they are and what they have. And I'm not talking about disadvantaged children in South Africa, because people would say that you can't compare it to the disadvantaged in South Africa. That's not the comparison I'm making at all. I'm comparing this to middle, upper class families. Our kids don't have buses that pick them up for school. You as a parent have the responsibility to get your child to school by 8 in the morning. So navigate through traffic, and from there you have to make your way to work. So you get to a classroom. We don't have indoor facilities. When it rains, you stand outside your classroom in the passageway and hope there's a little bit of an overhang that can not get your books and your clothing wet for the day. So extremely privileged, yeah. We go to school. You have your day. If it's cold, you come to school with your blanket. There's no such thing as central heating or central cooling. Some of our more private and elite schools have oil heaters in the classrooms, but you still change classes outside. Every single day, math, you would walk from math to English to your Afrikaans class to your language arts class. You would physically leave a classroom and walk to the next classroom. Doesn't matter whether you're in a private school or whether you're in a government school. So, that's something we really try and enforce with our kids, is never to lose that grounding that they received in South Africa, to realize that nothing comes easy. And the kids in America, I'm the first one to say that travel is so extremely important. And if children, and even as an adult, if you can travel to a country that don't have what you have here, it's truly an eye-opener.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the dangers that you had mentioned. You say the shift work, and like here, you got a 24-hour cycle. If you want to eat at 1 in the morning, it's open, and you just drive to the restaurant and you sit down and eat. Literally, especially in Houston, it is a city that does not sleep, comparable to Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, Las Vegas. And you had mentioned at night you've got some dangers. Can you describe that?
Once again, it's difficult territory to speak about, because our cities, there's various cities, like Houston would be a hub for human trafficking. You would have other areas that are more prone to gun violence. It is similar for us in South Africa, but a lot of our violence is driven by economics. So people are poor. There's some disadvantaged communities that really kill and break into homes for survival. But there's also the other side to it, that they simply just rob to kill. To answer your question, in the evenings, you don't want to be out on the roads. Hijackings is a really big reality in South Africa. So you often hear about hijackings here. Somebody stop a vehicle at a traffic light, at gunpoint, they force a person out the vehicle, and it makes your front page news, or it gets onto KPRC in the morning. That is life in South Africa. that is everyday life around every corner, any suburb, any socioeconomic area. So from the rich areas to the poorest areas, that is the risk you have. And that's a very big reality. And that causes a lot of people to leave the country, and which makes things worse. It's sad for people with extremely good education, with people with businesses leaving our country for those reasons. And my husband was a victim of a really violent crime. He's been in the food and beverage industry for 25 years in South Africa. And they were just at the shop one day and they just barged in, shot him, and he almost lost his leg. And by God's grace, he didn't. And that's everyday life in South Africa. You can't sit. One thing that I mean, yeah, we can leave our front door open on a Saturday morning if the weather is cool and we can be busy in the backyard. We can leave our car parked out in the front street. That's not something you can do in South Africa. And not only now, it's been like that for quite a few years. We have security doors and security bars on all our front doors, on all our opening windows. You cannot leave your car on the street. It will not be there tomorrow morning. So you have to put it behind a locked gate. And if you have dogs, and our dogs mostly live outside because we have good weather conditions for that. If you come home at night and your big dogs are not outside, you don't just go into your property. There's a reason. They've either been poisoned or they've been killed and somebody's waiting inside for you. So unfortunately, that is the reality of the crime. But we can't just, I have lots of family and friends that still live there, that's still very successful business people. So unfortunately, I can't just talk about the country. We have one of the most beautiful countries in the world when it comes to the coastlines. Economically, yes, it's taking strain. All industries are across the world, but South Africa is really feeling the pinch. But it's a beautiful country, natural resources, Cape Town, our wildlife, obviously, everybody knows about the South African safaris. Beautiful, beautiful to go on. Our animal life is absolutely extraordinary. So, but yeah, unfortunately, the crime and the statistics right now, it's very real. Our farm murders are extremely high. People get murdered on farms daily. The rate is unbelievable. And, you know, people get killed with pangas. They get burnt with hot irons. So it's really a sad situation. It really is.
Are the citizens of South Africa allowed to own a gun?
Yes. The gun laws in South Africa is very different from here. I must be honest, they're a lot stricter. So you can apply for a gun license. If you apply for self-defense, that's mostly people's reason for owning a gun. You can own a firearm for self-defense. You have to apply for the license. They do a full background check. You need to go for training for that particular firearm, and you need to come back with a competency certification that you can use that firearm and that you're competent to do so. Then you apply with the South African Police Service. Once they issue your license, you can then go and pick up your firearm. But the one comes before the other. Recreational arms is allowed. So if you're a hunter, you can get a hunting license for your hunting firearms. But walking into a Walmart or a department store with an ID and walking out with any form of a rifle, no.
You know, you mentioned violence, is, definitely something that has ravaged South Africa and continues to do. Now, you've been here for quite some time, and I'm very interested to get your take on the crime surge that we have seen in the United States since about 2019, 2020, where it's gotten really bad. And in some cities, the worst violence that they've ever seen, as well as a massive fentanyl and drug problem that's coming in through our southern border. Are you starting to see any sort of similarities between the United States and South Africa?
You know, as a layman on the street, it's also, again, it's a very difficult topic, and purely what I'm saying is purely a personal opinion.
Sure.
And definitely it has got increasingly more. You see it on television. There's a lot of media that is showing that there's definitely an increase. Is it gun violence that's increasing? Possibly. Is drugs increasing terribly? But if you look at when this started, and you sort of gave a specific timeline when this increase has happened, if you look at people's socioeconomic circumstances, that has deteriorated over the last years, and especially since COVID, families are taking strain, and mental health is becoming a really, really even bigger issue than it's always been in the United States. And I see it every day. My child goes to junior high, and we just encounter stories that come from school with children that are really battling, and they come from troubled homes. And I'm not talking about troubled homes being people that are historically troubled. It's just, as of late, people's circumstances have just changed so much. And guns, yes, we don't, as a family, we don't always agree with the gun laws in America. We don't agree with the way you can arm yourself, but we also don't agree with disarming. We don't agree with that. And having a son in the military, that's been in the military, it was great to get his perspective, because we really came in with a South African mindset, and he did change a lot of my mind to look at guns differently and to look at the use of guns differently. So to answer your question, to draw a comparison between South Africa and America, our crime there stems from very specific communities. Yeah, we have people, you get a boy, and it's subjects that I really don't want to touch on, but just for the sake of making a point here, a school shooting, a specific demographic, a specific age, a possible history with that individual. That kind of killing in South Africa comes from previously disadvantaged people. Our killings are from really, really violent crime people. We very seldom get mental health killings like you do here. It is just absolute violent crime. It's what they do. It's part of their makeup almost. And again, it's a very hard topic, and it's a very difficult conversation to have. But the two different violent, all of a sudden, we were talking about vehicle hijackings, your vehicle hijackings that you're getting here. We were very surprised to see that that's something that's all of a sudden popping its head out here. For us, they're stealing the vehicles to resell. They resell the parts, and they resell whatever is in the vehicle. So I'm still trying to fathom as to why they hijack here. What is the motivation? So I think the two motivational things is completely different from the countries.
Yeah. It's just crazy, the amount of just insanity that we have in this world, and it's sad. It's sad, and
It really is.
perhaps one day we will come together, even as a world, and have that peace, and find that strength, and people can live lives of real value, and work hard toward a common goal, and to improve your community by just getting involved. And it doesn't take a lot. Like I said in a podcast before, it's as simple as picking up trash in the community. Or doing something like you did the other day by picking up a tree that fell on the road. So that's something, that helps a community, and it helps bring people together. But we could talk about what we're talking about right now for hours and hours and hours. But I just wanted to get your perspective on those things there that I think a lot of people would want to know. And so that was very, nice of you to kind of touch on that and to kind of paint a picture of the differences and such. But your professional career is extraordinary. Now, you are a pilot, you are an aviation expert, you are an advocate, you have done so much. Can you kind of walk us through how you became a pilot and really a pioneer in the industry in South Africa as being a female pilot?
Yeah, it hasn't been an easy road. Obviously, you know, any boy at a young age, when you turn your eyes skyward, like Leonardo da Vinci said, you'll forever long to return there once you've been there. My interest started from attending a flight, actually an air show, quite a number of years ago, and I just got intrigued, and I went to a fly school for an introductory flight, and I absolutely loved it. Now, for a girl to enter the aviation industry in the era that I did, it was still pretty much unheard of, although we have some extremely good pilots now that started sort of around the same time as I did. My interest was it was just a personal thing. I always, I won't say I'm the boy side of the family, but I always did things different. I was never the makeup and the hairdo and the frilly thing. For me, it was outdoors, and aviation just happened to be something I loved, and it just developed as a passion eventually. Doing my pilot's license was really amazing, great experience, and I think the lessons it taught me in terms of discipline, perseverance, and you know, you come up against males every single day as a female in that environment, and you do get oppressed, and you often get depressed, and you think, am I really cut out for this? Is it really something I can do? And you have to find it in your inner self to really tell yourself that if this is something you want to pursue, you're going to have to just take whatever comes your way and make it happen. And once I earned some respect in the industry, and you build a relationship with people, and academically getting into the academic side also helped shape me in the industry, and it helped to really define where I wanted to go and give me a little bit of direction. So flying for a few years and getting to see the African continent was obviously a great benefit. I've been to most of the countries on the African continent, and with charter, which was absolutely wonderful. And the charter industry, for those that don't know, is very different from the airline industry. It's a get up and go industry, whether you fly for business or whether you fly for personal or recreational reasons, you must be able to go at any given time. So moving from flying in the industry to the operational side was a really amazing transition. And I think that's where I really found my niche. And this is something I really wanted to pursue. So the only way to get into the operational side and be a really hands-on person is once again in the charter industry. You get to deal with the aircraft, the fuel, the maintenance, the crew, the insurance, the financial side, your ground crew, your air crew, whether it's scheduling, whether it's making sure things happen on time. It's a really vibrant environment, and I had to do personality for that at the time. I'm sorry, Brian, we're doing this on the phone, so I'm just going to clear that.
Are you there?
Brian, I'm so sorry about that. We're
You're
doing
okay.
this on off time, so that was an unexpected one.
Yeah.
So that's what the charter industry gave me. It was an incredible opportunity for me to really showcase what I was capable of from an operations point of view. And that exposed me to smaller aircraft. And from there, I obviously got the experience. We went from piston aircraft to larger aircraft, and eventually into the jet aircraft market. And that's how I ended up with ExecuJet. So ExecuJet is one of the largest jet operators in the world. They have offices all over the world. And again, I think it's the excitement of the job and what it has to offer that really got me interested in that. And from there, all natural things developed. My involvement with the Civil Aviation Authority, my involvement with the Commercial Aviation Association of South Africa, my involvement with the Helicopter Association. So things started developing from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you really broke a barrier, in South Africa, being a woman. in aviation. So obviously you've got some courage, in you, and you also have, a lot of, strength, to go in there and battle as a female in a, very male dominant industry. And so, that again takes a lot, for somebody. Now, you've been flying, you're in all these industries, within the aviation world, and then you're crowned with being one of the first female aviation reporters in South Africa. What did reporting bring to you? And was it eye opening when you started to do this reporting?
So South Africa has got some amazing aviation magazines. World Air News is one of the biggest ones. It does get distributed globally. And then we've got African Pilot and the name of the other one, it'll get to me just now. So the magazine industry is really big, and we've got some really amazing pioneers in the aviation industry that have actually started up these magazines that come from flying backgrounds themselves. I was just extremely fortunate to befriend the editor and owner of World Air News magazine at the time, Mr. Tom Chalmers, and unfortunately he passed away a few years ago, but the magazine is still carrying on. So I met with Tom, and he did a little bit of a story on me, and he asked me if I would write something for him. We were at an air show, and he said, well, you were involved in that. Would you mind to just put a little bit of a story together for me? And I was obviously super excited about that, wrote the story, and the rest is history. For the next few years, I was super privileged, if I can say that, to write so many articles. And I've covered an array from air traffic navigational services to some of the airlines, to smaller aircraft, to development on aircraft engines, to the use of biofuels in aircraft. I've really covered such an incredible spectrum of stories. And then I was privileged enough to go on the delivery flight from Seattle to Hong Kong with the first Boeing 777 extended range, the 777ER, that Cathay Pacific acquired. I went on that delivery flight and got to speak or report back about all the new business amenities that the aircraft had on board, the new ergonomical seating that was introduced to those aircraft, and just generally the flight and the flight experience. So those kind of things were really priceless for me. Getting to go to different continents, experiencing almost every single air show in Africa. If there was an air show, I was sent there. I would go there as a representative, write the story about it. And yeah, every time something new came out on an aircraft, if it was a technical thing, I would go do the investigation. And then I often had the opportunity to fly in the actual aircraft. As I did know, the first photo you used of me was the Harvard World War II aircraft. And the experience I had to fly in that and then come back and speak about that. So it was just all-round aviation excitement.
Awesome. Yeah, again, folks, this may seem like it's a rushed interview, but it is sincerely not. I just want to try to cover as much as we possibly can on this remarkable woman, because we're about to get into some muddy waters here, if you will, and will definitely open your eyes about what will come next for Natasha. Now, after spending years and years in the industry, not only as a pilot, but as an expert in aviation and as a writer and a reporter. In 2012, you published a book, If Cockpits Could Talk. Can you describe the motivation behind this book and why you wrote it?
Yes, so this is If Cockpits Could Talk. It's an ebook that I wrote in 2012, as you say. So what happened during that time, there was a critical time in aviation in South Africa where some of the pilots with the airline was caught buying their licenses. And there was a committee that was designated to look into the fraudulent purchasing of pilots' licenses for the airlines. And I was at home one evening and I got a phone call, and it was one of the pilots that purchased his license. And he said to me, listen, I know that you, one of the consultants that's working against the Civil Aviation Authority, and I will tell you now why it was against them and not with them, to get the pilots to come clean who purchased their licenses. And he said to me, I was one of them, and I'm going to tell you how I obtained my license. So what happened was, there was somebody that worked inside the Civil Aviation Authority. Now, when you write your commercial pilot's license, you get scheduled on a computer, pretty similar to how you would write an exam in America. You would schedule a specific time and a day. You would go, and your computer will have a specific exam on it. So what happened was, the person inside the Civil Aviation Authority would schedule a specific exam. So if there was maybe for meteorology or air law, if there were 2 or 3 different papers, he would schedule paper A and then provide the student with paper A to study. And they would in turn write him a check. So he was getting financial benefit from this. And the check had come back in the mail. So previously, when you used to write checks, I'm not sure if it works the same in the US, but you would eventually, all the checks that you've written during that month would be sent back to you by the bank. So he had the proof that this check was written to this individual at the Civil Aviation Authority, that he specifically scheduled that exam for that particular day. This all came out. We started a huge investigation. We got everybody involved, and most of the pilots then were sort of subsequently caught out, and they all came clean, and an investigation and a police investigation started. So this story got so big, and this is what motivated If Cockpits Could Talk. The story got so big that unfortunately some of the South African police people and heavyweights were involved in this scam. One evening, my husband and I went out. The kids were at home with my nanny, and thankfully they were asleep. And they broke into our home, and they broke into our offices. They tied our nanny up, and they basically looked for any evidence that we had. Thankfully, our offices were behind locked gates, and our firearm was locked in there, thankfully, as well. So when we got home after an evening out, we found our nanny tied up. And we were on the front page of the then South African Beeld, it was called the Beeld newspaper. She put out a sketch. Thankfully, she was able to tell the police what the individuals looked like. So they put together a sketch, and it took about 2 weeks for the police to identify who this could possibly be. But now we were working with police that didn't want us to unravel what was happening, because there were so many of them involved in this entire scam. So it was about 3 or 4 days after that, I get a phone call at work. I was working at Lanseria Airport at the time, to say that the school didn't have a permission slip from me for my father-in-law to pick up my son. So I said, no, he doesn't have permission to pick him up. There was no arrangement. And the lady said to me, well, he's at the gate to pick up your son. So thankfully, they knew what was going on, and the lady was a step ahead of them, the teacher, and she took a picture of the person trying to pick up my son, and they sped away, and they tied the picture to the same person that was in our house a few days prior to that. So it was really a difficult situation, and the reason all of this transpired was that they knew we were onto them. I got a personal phone call from the head of the police that time in South Africa. It was one evening around about 9 o'clock, saying to me that if I think a housebreaking and the attempted kidnapping my son was the worst, if we don't drop the investigation, this is definitely not where it will end. And we dropped the investigation.
Incredible. So you exposed some corruption going on in the Civil Aviation Authority, and
Yes.
it led to your nanny being tied up and perhaps nearly killed,
Yes.
as well as the attempted kidnapping of your son, and really threats on your life, your husband's life. When you were exposing this, at times, did you say, I don't know if I want to write about this or talk about this? Or did you felt called to say, I need to put this out there, as an advocate and as a strong voice in the aviation community?
It was a very, very difficult decision to make at the time, because when I speak about the corruption in the aviation industry, it goes so much further. We have within the Civil Aviation Authority, there is an organization or a body that approves licenses. So domestic and international air service licensing is done by a council inside the Civil Aviation Authority. And a lot of those licenses that get applied for is done by people that have really done a lot of corrupt things in the industry. And one of the aviators that continuously got licenses approved was somebody that was continuously overloading aircraft, getting crew to fly without appropriate licenses, getting crew to fly without appropriate aircraft licensing. So this whole corruption thing was just so big, and it affected so many areas in aviation. So when I made the decision to write the book, it was a very conscious decision. At that time, there were so many people in the industry that wanted to clean up what was happening in the industry, and you just fighting a brick wall. It's just something that cannot be done unless you have authority support. But yeah, you have authorities that are unfortunately the big culprits. So the decision to write the book was absolutely to put it out there, and it took a lot of bravery. It took a lot of deep thinking,
Courage,
and courage, and a really, really understanding for what consequences could come from it. And thankfully, nothing bad ever happened as a result. The book was put out there, and I do believe that a lot of cleanup has been done in the industry. But from what I hear, still on a daily basis, unfortunately, it still carries on.
I am shocked at how powerful this aviation industry, this Civil Aviation Authority is to come after you. People wouldn't think of something like an aviation industry. It would be, almost like putting out hits as if it is the mafia or the mob or the cartel, and that right there is frightening, especially when you're doing everything the right way. And,
So,
you've got a family.
If I can just interrupt you there for a second,
Yeah.
Terry, one of the person that was actually inside our home, our president at the time was President Thabo Mbeki. And the person that was inside our home that was identified by my nanny was actually the personal bodyguard for Thabo Mbeki at the time. And he was in a personal friendship relationship with the head of the Civil Aviation Authority. And there were pictures available of them all together on a boat having a party. So the social interaction there was behind the scenes. So when you get an integrated situation like that, it makes it very difficult to fight the corruption. And, as an individual and a small business, your small little aviation business becomes almost non-existent in the bigger scheme of things. So unless this is fought at government level and filtered down to fix, this is just something that's never ever going to get fixed. And the sad part is about that is that we're now compromising aviation safety as a result.
Incredible. And now I want to get into this. I mean, like, we're all over the place here. And again, I'm trying to get as much out there. Your story is absolutely insane. And folks, I've heard a lot of crazy stories. I have one myself. But this one here is it's remarkable. It's incredible. It's sad. It's inspirational. It's horrifying. But again, it's deserving of being told. Now, I want you to explain to me, and I know we're going here, we're going there, but again, I'm trying to get as much out there as I possibly can. Now, can you take us to the time over that 6-month period when you were put in some pretty dangerous and unlivable conditions where you actually survived cerebral malaria 5 times and typhoid 6 times in a 6-month period, and nearly cost you your life, and again, in unimaginable living conditions? Can you take me there?
Absolutely. So when South Africa became very difficult, the last couple of years, the aviation industry took a downturn. And just to explain why we ended up moving, is an airport like Lanseria. In 2001, there were 45 charter companies operating and doing extremely well at the time. As of 2019 or 2020, I think there's about 5 companies that still operate successfully. So that's the downturn. So as a result of that, jobs became extremely hard to come by. And for somebody like me that's on an operational management side, there's just no work available for anybody anymore. So I started looking outside the country. My brother was head of the Nigerian Air Force Maintenance Division based in Nigeria, in Abuja. So I started having conversations with him, and he was extremely successful, but he worked for an American company, so he was pretty much protected in the Nigerian environment. So I started reaching out to some companies in Nigeria, and I actually had somebody from a company based in Miami reach out to me and say, listen, we own a company in Nigeria and we're desperate for somebody to come and do the entire setup, from a fixed base operation to a charter business to running our fleet of jet aircraft for a very rich guy in Nigeria. They paid for absolutely everything to take me to Nigeria to first go and make sure that I like what I see and this is something that I can do. Now, keep in mind that there's a lot of expats in Nigeria, and a lot of people in America that's been in the oil and gas industry will know that there's a lot of offshore work from there, going to the west coast, off the Angolan coast. So Nigeria has got a mix of cultures, so you don't feel all that alone when you go there. So when I went for my interview, I went to Abuja, we went to Lagos for some more chatting about what I would be doing and what my responsibilities would be. And we also went to a little town called Kaduna. And Kaduna is one of it's really rich in like land, it's farming land. So it's such a rich area and absolutely beautiful. But the infrastructure for aviation, it's just non-existent. There's a little airport, but not much happens there. They were basically just storing their aircraft there. So I would be based in Abuja. So my interview came, everything went well. They offered me the job, and obviously getting paid in dollars, they were prepared to move my entire family to Nigeria, and we would have carte blanche there, as they would say. I came back. It took us about 2 months to pack up and make the final decision. So I moved there with my entire family. I was going to head up one of the biggest jet fleet businesses called Skyjet in Abuja, Nigeria. And I was working for a particular Nigerian gentleman. Now, that was unfortunately the downside to this. Is I was working directly for a Nigerian who was very involved in the Nigerian government and not for an American company. So I had absolutely no protection there. Again, going out there, it was a fleet of aircraft that I absolutely loved. It was the Legacies, and amazing aircraft. We fly them in South Africa as well. So it was familiar territory for me. Arriving there, I got a hangar and I got about 25 staff. Now, also keep in mind that I'm in a primarily Muslim country, and I'm a white Christian woman, so I kind of stand out like a sore thumb at the airport. And initially, I used to walk in there and thinking, well, it will change over time. Well, the first 3 weeks, I ended up going in a t-shirt with sneakers and shorts, and my husband and my kids coming to help sort out our storeroom. The staff would sit outside watching us and literally laughing. They just wouldn't work for a white woman. So, yeah, I am completely committed to managing 7 or 8 aircraft that I need to get returns on, and I have staff that is just not interested, and that's just not going to help me. So I had to draw on everything that I've learned from leadership over the years and everything that I've learned from the aviation industry and the discipline and the perseverance. I had to draw on the sum of all of that to create a path for survival for me in Nigeria, and said, okay, well, you guys don't want to help doing this? You can sit outside. I'm going to get this ready, inspection ready. We built the entire storeroom. I had 2 South African engineers that were responsible for the maintenance on the aircraft. So there we at least had a good relationship going. And slowly the staff started seeing that, well, I'm not going away. And keep in mind that Nigerians don't pay their staff, and they get paid in Naira. So 15,000 Naira salary a month is the equivalent of about $50. And they only get paid that if the boss feels like paying them. I came in and I made them the promise that as long as I run that business, they will get paid monthly. And I kept my promise from the first month I was there. And it was amazing. After 3 weeks, I had staff that started coming. When I get out the car, they would run to me, they would carry my bag. They would take me to the office. Morning, ma'am, or madame. They addressed me as madame. Morning, madame. How do we help you today? What can we do for you? To building up such a rapport with them. And in the morning, other people come into the gates. If you come into the airport at Abuja, you are met with an AK-47, whether you like it or not. I had one pointed at me every single morning going to work. Pointed through your car. What have you got today? What is in your lunch bag? Okay, well, we want it. So I had to part with my lunch on a daily basis. For the guards at the gate, we would buy them some cases of water to just end up having a good relationship with them and maintaining that good relationship with them. So the mutual respect developed from there, and that's how I got my workers to start working. Where the trouble started and where the really tricky situation started was when I started getting involved on the finance side. Money there is paid in cash. Money laundering is extremely big in Nigeria. People work with cash, and money doesn't go into the banks there. And I was expected to operate aircraft, and I'm probably saying this on air at great peril, but I had pilots that did not have pilot licenses. I had crew that weren't rated on the aircraft, that weren't adequately rated. I had aircraft that did not have their maintenance attended to. The South African engineers would work on the maintenance, but the owner of the company would take some responsibilities away and allow the aircraft to fly without aircraft maintenance being signed out. These aircraft were San Marino registered at the time, but they've subsequently gone back onto the Nigerian register. I was just not prepared to operate aircraft like that. I was not prepared to launder the money the way they wanted to do. And I had to attend a meeting at my boss's house. And my husband and I were invited there. And I literally got a direct threat to say that you will do as you're told or else. Now, the compound where we lived, I had 6 guards that guarded where we stayed. And that is the norm in Nigeria. It wasn't just unique to me. I had a driver. They didn't allow me to drive. Eventually, I ended up driving myself because the driving is just too dangerous. So I was told that if I don't do what they want me to do and if I don't let the pilots fly without adequate, they didn't have medicals, they didn't have their pilot's licenses current, that something would happen to me and my family. We visited the South African embassy. I just took a morning off. I said that I needed some time with my daughter. We went to the South African embassy and I spoke to the embassy representative. I told her what happened. And they said to me, we will give you the housing. We will give you absolutely everything you need. Please just get out the country because they will kill you. And we made our way to the US. And when we landed here, the first text message I had on my phone is, I know where you are. You can run, but you can't hide. So we had to take the story, and I've sent it off to the FBI with all the information. We sent an email. Whatever happened from there, we don't know, but we're still here 5 years later and safe.
Horrifying. Can you talk about these conditions that you're in? And I appreciate you giving us all this more information on the corruption and everything that your career has taken you through, albeit a very successful career with a lot of opportunity, but also a very, very dangerous career, if you will. Now, I've only done this one other time and now 42 episodes. If it's okay with you, we got 3 minutes left here, but there's more information I think that we need to get to. Would you be okay with going for an additional 15 to 20 minutes on the second?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. So let's do this. Let's touch on a little bit of the this cerebral malaria and the typhoid that you went through in that condition. And then as we get to about the 59-minute mark or whatever, the 59:30, we'll go ahead and stop, and then we'll restart a whole new one.
Okay. So Nigeria is known for malaria. Northern Africa is really one of the biggest areas where malaria happens. And you can take tablets before the time, but even when I was in the aviation industry in South Africa, when we send people to North Africa, often when you take the tablets or you take a prophylactic before the time, unfortunately, it's very hard for them sometimes to diagnose it quick enough. By that time, a lot of the subsequent things have cerebrally would step in. So you ideally don't want to go onto any medication. So when you get malaria, they can, identify it quickly. So in most of the other countries, malaria medication is not available. But because of the mortality rate in Nigeria, you can walk in and buy medication over the counter. So the first time I got it, I took tablets, and after 3 or 4 days, I really, really got sick. And they got a military doctor. I was very well looked after because of my boss's status in Nigeria. I had the military look after me, so a military doctor took care of me. Got 3 injections and malaria was gone. 5 days later, I tested positive again. And this just carried on and carried on. So when I had malaria the 3rd time, my immune system was so down, and I kept on going to work every day. We worked in 105 degrees outside at the airfield. I'm sure most people listening know that was in the aviation industry know what that's like. it is really hot out there, and I had a job to do, and I just needed to get on with it. So, there was no time to get sick. And on my third time getting malaria, I ended up with typhoid. And I picked up typhoid from eating